Sooner or later, somebody says it to you. You're talking about the Bible, about Abraham, about the resurrection, and they fold their arms and say, I just follow the science. And a lot of Christians panic when they hear that. They get defensive. They start arguing against science. I'm not going to do that today because I have spent 45 years in ministry and I have never once been afraid of science. I love science. What I'm going to show you today is something different. I'm going to show you that the person who says, I just follow the science to settle a question about God, has made a mistake. Not a moral mistake, a category mistake. They've picked up the wrong tool for the job. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Stay with me. For 6 episodes now, we've been doing hard, honest work with evidence. We looked at the archaeology of the patriarchs. We looked at the Exodus. We looked at the conquest, the camels, the numbers. We did not flinch, and we did not fake it. So if you've been with me this whole way, there's a question sitting in the back of your mind right now. It sounds like this. Okay, Randy, but at the end of the day, shouldn't we just go with where the evidence leads? Shouldn't we be scientific about all of this? Yes, we should. 100%. But here's what nobody stops to ask. What is science? What is it actually for? Because most people, and I mean most Christians and most atheists, are walking around with a fuzzy idea of science that's doing a lot of heavy lifting they never check. Before you can ask whether science and faith are at war, you have to know what science is. So today, we clear the ground. No archaeology, no theology yet, just one question. What is this tool, and what is it good for? Stick with me to the end, because the payoff isn't really about science at all. It's about a question every one of us has to answer. We'll get there. Let me give you the picture that holds this whole thing together. A hammer is a magnificent tool. If you need it to drive a nail, there's nothing better. But if I handed you a hammer and asked you to write a poem with it, you would look at me like I'd lost my mind. Not because the hammer's broken, not because the hammer's weak, but because a hammer is a hammer. It was built for one kind of job, and writing poetry is a different kind of job. Now, is the hammer anti-poetry? Of course not. The hammer has no opinion about poetry. It just can't do that work because that's not what it's for. Hold on to that, because that's exactly the relationship between science and the questions we ask about God. So let's define it. What is science, really? Science is a method. That's the first thing, and it's the thing people forget. Science is not a pile of facts. It's not a worldview. It's a process, a disciplined way of asking and answering a specific kind of question. You observe something in the natural world. You propose an explanation you can test. You make a prediction. You run the experiment. And then, this is the beautiful part, somebody else runs it again to check your work. That's why science is so powerful. It corrects itself. Bad ideas get filtered out. Good ideas get sharpened. It's one of the finest tools the human mind has ever built. Here's the second thing. Science studies the natural world using natural explanations. Scholars call that methodological naturalism, which is a $10 phrase for a simple idea. When a scientist is doing science, they only work with things they can measure, repeat, and test. And here's a reason for that. You cannot run an experiment on God. You can't put the Almighty in a test tube. You can't say, everybody hold still, we're going to replicate the parting of the Red Sea on Tuesday. The moment one of your variables is the living God, the experiment is over. Now listen carefully, because this is where people get confused. That limitation is not science saying God isn't real. It's science saying, that's not my department. Think about a metal detector. A metal detector is wonderful at finding coins in the sand. Run it over a wooden table, and it finds nothing. Does that prove wood doesn't exist? Of course not. It proves the detector detects metal. That's all. Wood is real. The detector just isn't built to find it. Science is a detector, tuned to the natural, the measurable, the repeatable. When it goes quiet on the question of God, that is not evidence against God. That's the tool telling you it was built for a different kind of search. Here's the cleanest way I know how to see the boundary. Science is brilliant at how questions. How does DNA copy itself? How fast does light travel? How do antibiotics kill bacteria? Ask science a how question and stand back, because it will answer beautifully. But there's another kind of question. Why is there something rather than nothing? What is a human life for? Is there meaning in suffering? What should I do with my freedom? Those are not how questions. You cannot measure your way to the meaning of your life. There's no experiment for should. And that's not because these questions are silly or soft. Those are the questions you'll actually lie awake at night wrestling with. They are the most important questions you'll ever ask. They're just not scientific questions. They're philosophical. They're moral. They're theological. Science can tell you about how the heart pumps blood. It cannot tell you why your heart is broken or what to do about it. So here's the trap. Almost everybody who says, I just follow the science, has walked into it without noticing. There's science, the method, and then there's something else that wears science like a costume. It's called scientism. And scientism is the belief that science is the only source of real knowledge. That if you can't prove it in a lab, it isn't real or it doesn't matter. That sounds tough-minded. It sounds rigorous. But watch what happens when you turn it on itself. The statement is, only things that can be scientifically proven are true. Okay, run that statement through a lab. Test it. Replicate it. You can't. There's no experiment that proves only experiments give us truth. It fails its own test. It's a philosophical claim wearing a scientist's coat. So scientism is not science. It's a philosophy about science, and a self-refuting one at that. And here's how you know it's false in plain daylight. You already know dozens of true things that no laboratory ever handed you. 2 + 2 is 4. You didn't discover that with a microscope. It's wrong to torture a child for fun. That's not a lab result, but you would stake your life on it. Your spouse loves you. Caesar crossed the Rubicon. Mozart is beautiful. Every one of those is true. Not one of them is scientific. If you threw out everything science can't verify, you'd have to throw out mathematics, logic, history, morality, and love. And unfortunately, in our modern day, many people have done exactly that. Nobody actually lives that way. Nobody can. Let me pause for 1 second. If this is the kind of teaching you've been looking for, the kind that doesn't flinch for the hard questions, do me a favor and subscribe to Verse by Verse with Pastor Randy. There's a lot more where this came from. And if it's helping you, a quick like genuinely helps it reach somebody who needs it. All right, back to it. And let me clear one more thing off the table, because it gets repeated constantly. The idea that science and atheism are the same team. They are not. Science is religiously neutral. It doesn't require atheism, and it doesn't produce it. Look at the people who built modern science. Isaac Newton, a devout believer. Johannes Kepler said he was thinking God's thoughts after him. Gregor Mendel, the father of genetics, was a monk. Georges Lemaitre, the man who first proposed what we now call the Big Bang, he was a Catholic priest. These men weren't doing science in spite of their faith. Many of them did science because of their faith. They believed the universe was made by a rational God, so they expected it to be orderly, lawful, discoverable, and they weren't looking. An atheist and a Christian can stand at the same lab bench and run the exact same experiment because they both agree the natural world is real and runs on consistent laws. Where they disagree is on what grounds those laws. And that, my friends, is not a scientific question. That's a question about the poem, not the nail. So like we've done in every episode, I do want to address some objections. Objection 1. But science keeps replacing God. Every gap gets filled. Now somebody's going to say, come on, Randy. For centuries, people said God did it about lightning, about disease, about the planet. And every single time, science came along and found the natural cause. God keeps getting smaller. Eventually, science fills every gap. That's a fair challenge, and I want to answer it honestly. Here's the problem with it. It assumes God and natural causes are competitors. Like if a natural mechanism explains something, then God is squeezed out of the room. But that was never the Christian claim. When I say God sustains the universe, I'm not saying God is the gap where the physics runs out. I'm saying God is the author of the physics. Finding the mechanism doesn't evict the maker. If I show you the gears of a watch, I haven't disproved the watchmaker. I've shown you his craftsmanship. Colossians 1 says of Christ, "In him all things hold together." That's not a claim about a gap. That's a claim about the whole thing, the gears, the laws, the order itself. Science describing how the watch works does not threaten the watchmaker. It illustrates it. Objection 2. Then faith is just believing without evidence. I have one of my commenters say this, the opposite of science. Here's the one that really sits under all the others. People think faith means believing things with no evidence, closing your eyes and hoping, the opposite of reason. But that is not what the Bible means by faith. Listen to Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Notice the words, assurance, conviction. That's not wishful thinking. That's confident trust in things you can't see. And we live by that kind of knowing all the time. You trust that your memory of yesterday is real, though you can't run an experiment on the past. You trust that other people have minds and feelings, or at least I hope you do, though you've never measured a single one. You trust the testimony of witnesses in a courtroom, and you'll send a man to prison on it. None of that is scientific. All of it is reasonable. So here's the question that matters. The central claim of the Christian faith is not, I feel God. It's a claim about something that happened in history. A man named Jesus of Nazareth was crucified under Pontius Pilate, was buried, and 3 days later walked out of the tomb. Now, is that a scientific question? No. You cannot put the resurrection in a test tube. It happened once. It's not repeatable on demand. Science deals with what repeats. This was a singular event in history. But not scientific does not mean not knowable. It means it's a historical question, the kind you answer the way you answer any claim about the past. You weigh the testimony. You examine the witnesses. You ask what best explains the evidence. Was the tomb empty? Did hundreds of people claim to see him alive? Did men who had everything to lose die rather than take it back? Paul stakes the entire faith on it. 1 Corinthians 15, if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile. He doesn't say it still works as a nice story. He says if it didn't happen, we're done. That's not a man hiding from evidence. That's a man betting everything on a historical claim and inviting you to investigate it. So what do you do with this? Let me give you 3 things to walk out with. First, stop letting people in conversations with the word science, like it's a trump card. Next time someone says, I just follow the science to wave away the question of God, you don't have to panic, and you don't have to argue against science. You can say, good, so do I. Now, is the question you're asking a how question or a why question? Because we may have just reached for the wrong tool. Second, learn the difference between science and scientism, and guard your heart against it. It's easy to be quietly intimidated, to feel like faith is the junior partner that has to apologize for existing. It isn't. Science is a magnificent hammer. It is not a Bible. Honor it for what it is, and don't ask it for what it was never built to give. Third, and this is the pastoral one, if you have been carrying a low-grade shame, like your faith is something you believe despite the evidence, like you're a little bit irrational to follow Jesus, I want to set you free from that today. The God who made the universe made your mind. He is not threatened by your hardest questions. He's been answering them for 4,000 years. Intellectual honesty is not the enemy of faith. It is a requirement of it. I want to hear from you on this one. Has anyone ever ended a conversation about your faith just by saying the word science, like it settled everything? What did you say back? Let me know in the comments. I read them. Now, we have spent 7 episodes clearing the ground. We faced the archaeology honestly. We sorted the real objections from the overstated ones. And tonight, we got clear on what kind of tool answers what kind of question. So the ground is clear. And starting next time, we start to build. Because I keep saying this word, Judaism, the Jewish people, God's covenant, and I've been treating it like everybody already knows what it means. But here's something most Christians have never stopped to consider. If the things we've been talking about are actually true, if God really did appear to a real man and make real promises, then Judaism is not just another religion. It is categorically different from every other faith on earth, and that one fact changes the entire conversation about Israel. So if you got something out of this, if it cleared something up for you, subscribe so you don't miss where we go next, because this is where the series turns. We start to build. The next one is right there waiting for you. I'll see you in episode 8.